This place was built for monsters, no windows, no sunlight, no names, just numbers. Locked behind 7-inch steel doors, watched by drones and sealed off from the world by 19 guard towers. This isn't a prison, it's a fortress of fear. Welcome to CECOT, the world's most secure prison, where the most dangerous people alive are erased from existence. In the heart of El Salvador's remote countryside lies CECOT, the terrorism confinement center built in just 7 months under President Nayib Bukele's iron rule. It's more than a prison, it's a message to the world. This $120 million mega prison was designed to bury gang leaders, murderers, and terrorists forever. It holds over 40,000 inmates, including the most feared members of MS-13 and Barrio 18. Inside, there are no rehabilitation programs, no family visits, no sunlight, just 24/7 surveillance, concrete bunkers, and brutal discipline. Each cell holds up to 150 men, with only 2 toilets, no mattresses, and no daylight. It's designed not just to contain, but to erase. Human rights groups call it a black hole. El Salvador calls it justice, protected by 600 soldiers. Electrified fences and facial recognition gates. Escape is impossible. No one has ever gotten out. No one ever will. Hey guys, tonight we journey to a place carved from concrete and despair, a modern-day fortress designed to hold 40,000 souls in a state of suspended animation. It's called CECOT, the Center for the Confinement of Terrorism, and it's El Salvador's answer to a problem that nearly tore the country apart. Imagine for a moment you're walking down a street, not in a war zone, but a regular neighborhood, yet every wall is a billboard of unspoken threats, a spiderweb of graffiti marks territory, a silent declaration of who owns this block, this store, this very patch of sidewalk you're standing on. The people you pass hurry by, their eyes fixed on the ground, because eye contact is a luxury they can't afford. This is a world governed by invisible lines and brutal codes, a place where you probably wouldn't survive the afternoon, let alone a full day, without a guide. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It helps the channel more than you know, and I'd love to hear where you're listening from and what time it is. So drop your city and local time in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Before the concrete leviathan of CECOT ever rose from the Salvadoran soil, there was the chaos that demanded it. You have to understand, the air itself felt different. It was thick with attention. You could almost taste a metallic tang of fear that clung to the humid nights. This wasn't a country at war in the traditional sense. There were no uniformed armies marching through the streets, but the nation was a captive, held hostage by its own children. The architects of this terror were the Maras, the gangs most notoriously MS-13 or Mara Salvatrucha, and their bitter rivals Barrio 18. These weren't just street thugs. They were sprawling shadow governments with their own laws, their own taxes, and their own brutal forms of justice. You see them everywhere, not just in the elaborate tattoos that crawl across their skin spelling out allegiances and sins, but in the very fabric of daily life. The local pupusa seller on the corner, she has to pay a weekly fee, a renta, to the gang that controls her neighborhood. It's a war tax, and the war is for her soul and her street. The bus driver you ride with pays it to a fee per trip to ensure his vehicle isn't burned and his passengers aren't harmed. And you as a passenger feel that tension every time the bus slows down in a new neighborhood, a new clique's territory. The gangs were more organized than many a tech startup, with intricate hierarchies and designated territories. Their business model was fear, and business was booming. They were born not in the jungles of Central America, but on the asphalt streets of Los Angeles, a mainstream historical fact that is crucial to this story. Young Salvadorans who had fled their country's brutal civil war in the 1980s found themselves marginalized and isolated in a new land, so they formed gangs for protection and identity. Then, in the 1990s, U.S. immigration policy shifted dramatically, and thousands of these now hardened gang members were deported back to a post-war El Salvador, a country with weak institutions and a traumatized population, they brought their gang culture, their rivalries, and their violence, with them seeding the ground for the nightmare to come. It's a classic case of a problem being exported and then festering into a catastrophe. Historians still argue whether the U.S. deportation policies of the 1990s were the primary catalyst for the explosion of gang violence in Central America, or if local conditions were already ripe for such a disaster. Either way, the result was the same. El Salvador became one of the most dangerous places on earth. The title "No Tourism Board Ever Wants You Feel This Danger." On a personal level, you learn the rules. Fast you learn which streets to avoid after dark, which hand signs mean death, and which colors are affiliated with which gang. You learn to make yourself small, invisible. You hear the stories from your neighbors, a cousin who was killed for refusing to join a friend who had to abandon their small shop because the extortion became unbearable. The violence was intimate and inescapable. Previous governments had tried to fight back with so-called mano dura, or iron fist policies. They arrested tens of thousands of suspected gang members, but these policies were about as effective as trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. The overcrowded prisons became what officials grimly called crime universities. They were the corporate headquarters for the maras, where leaders insulated from the risks of the street could plan operations, recruit new members, and run their empires using smuggled cell phones. The guards were often bribed or intimidated. The state had lost control of its own penitentiaries. It's a quirky and frankly terrifying tidbit of this era that the gangs had meticulous ledgers for their extortion rackets, keeping track of payments and deadlines with a level of detail that would make a CPA proud. Their customer service, if you could call it, that was certainly more responsive than your average utility company. If you missed a payment, you'd get a follow-up call very, very quickly. The country was bleeding out. Its homicide rate soared to the highest in the world for a nation not officially at war. Life became a grim calculation of risk, a daily navigation of invisible front lines. People stopped dreaming of a better future and started dreaming only of escape to another country, another life, anywhere. But here, this was the El Salvador that existed on the precipice, a nation so saturated with violence and despair that its people were willing to accept almost any solution, no matter how extreme, to make it stop. The stage was set for a new kind of leader with a new kind of promise, a promise not of reform, but of eradication, a promise that would eventually be poured into 40,000 tons of steel and concrete, a promise that would be named CECOT. And into this vacuum of hope stepped a figure unlike any El Salvador had seen before, a man who looked less like a traditional head of state and more like a tech CEO who decided to run a country instead of just disrupting the taxi industry. His name was Nayib Bukele, a millennial president with a penchant for backwards baseball caps, designer sunglasses, and a masterful command of social media. He didn't speak in the tired platitudes of the old political parties. He spoke in memes, in tweets, and in bold, dramatic gestures that captivated a nation starved for action. He represented a clean break, a stylish repudiation of the corrupt and ineffective governments that had allowed the gangs to fester for so long. His rise was meteoric, fueled by a deep-seated public disgust with the status quo. He had served as the mayor of San Salvador, a mainstream historical fact, where he honed his image as a doer, beautifying public spaces and launching high-visibility projects that signaled a new kind of governance, one focused on tangible results and slick branding. He promised to make El Salvador cool again, a promise that sounded almost absurd in a country with one of the world's highest murder rates, but people were desperate enough to believe him. For a while, his presidency focused on these kinds of projects: a new library, here a coastal development, there things that chipped away at the edges of the country's despair. But the beast of gang violence remained largely untouched. Then came the weekend that changed everything. In late March 2022, the gangs unleashed a wave of violence so shocking, so audacious, that it felt like a declaration of war on the state itself, a brutal message to the new president. Over a single bloody weekend, more than 87 people were murdered across the country, shot in the streets, executed in their homes, killed for reasons as flimsy as living in the wrong neighborhood. The nation reeled in horror. The fragile sense of hope Bukele had been building seemed to shatter in an instant, and you could feel the old fear creeping back into the air, a cold, familiar dread. Political analysts continued to debate whether Bukele's rise represented a genuine popular revolution against a corrupt elite or a masterful co-opting of public anger for authoritarian ends. But in that moment of crisis, the debate seemed academic. The people didn't want analysis. They wanted salvation, and Bukele gave them a response that was as swift as it was severe. He didn't just condemn the violence. He declared war back on the gangs. He went before the legislature and demanded they grant him extraordinary powers, a state of exception, a regimen d'exception. This wasn't a minor policy shift. It was a constitutional earthquake. The state of exception suspended fundamental rights. The right to legal defense was curtailed. You could be held for 15 days without charge instead of 72 hours, and the authorities no longer needed a warrant to arrest you or to search your home or monitor your communications. It was the mano dura, iron fist philosophy of the past, but supercharged with a digital age ruthlessness and a complete disregard for due process. It was a stunning move, and Bukele announced it not in a dry press conference, but on Twitter, a quirky tidbit of his modern presidency, where he had been known to fire cabinet ministers and issue national directives, with the single post effectively governing by social media long before it became a global political trend. For his critics, it was a terrifying lurch towards authoritarianism, a dismantling of democratic norms in the name of security for the vast majority of Salvadorans. However, it was a lifeline, a necessary evil they were willing to embrace if it meant they could walk the streets without fear again, if it meant the voice of the extortionist would finally be silenced. The feeling was palpable, a collective holding of the breath. You watch the news on your phone, scrolling through the frantic updates. The president's face, stern and determined, filled the screen, promising to hunt down the gang members wherever they are. He told the criminals, your party is over. The message was clear. The old rules no longer applied. The gloves were off. El Salvador had traded a degree of freedom for a promise of security, and the architect of this trade was a president who understood that in an age of fear, a strong man with a simple message and a powerful brand could become a savior. The nation braced itself for what was to come. No one knew exactly what this new era would look like, but they knew the ground had shifted beneath their feet. The iron fist had clenched, and it was about to come down hard. The quiet before the storm descended on the country, a heavy silence pregnant with both hope and dread. Suddenly the right to remain silent became less of a legal protection and more of a national pastime, as everyone waited to see what would happen next. The stage was now set for the next act of this national drama, the great roundup, a dragnet so vast it would sweep up tens of thousands and change the face of the nation forever. And so it began, not with a bang, but with the quiet thud of a boot against a flimsy door in the dead of night. The state of exception wasn't just a legal document, it was a hunting license, and the prey was anyone who even vaguely fit the profile of a terrorist, a term now broadly applied to any suspected gang member or collaborator. You feel the shift in the atmosphere almost immediately. The old fear of the Mars, the fear of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. That fear doesn't vanish, it just gets a new uniform. The sound of the neighborhood changes. The laughter and music that used to spill out into the humid evenings are replaced by the rumble of military trucks patrolling streets they had long ceded to the gangs. Now heavily armed soldiers and police officers in black balaclavas stand on the same street corners where gang lookouts once stood. Their presence a constant, suffocating reminder of the new order. The roundup is relentless and indiscriminate, a vast human dragnet cast across the entire country. The raids happen at all hours. You might be asleep in your bed when the sharp rap on the door comes a sound that makes your heart leap into your throat. Or you could be on a bus on your way to work when it suddenly stopped and boarded by soldiers who scan every passenger with cold, impersonal eyes, looking for the telltale signs of a suspicious glance, a nervous twitch, or the most damning evidence of all. The government's new approach was a mainstream historical fact. It empowered security forces to arrest individuals based on their appearance or perceived affiliation without needing concrete evidence, which led to a massive surge in detentions based on profiling. The criteria for arrest are terrifyingly vague. Do you have a tattoo? It doesn't have to be a gang tattoo. It could be a cross, a rose, a tribute to your mother. Suddenly, any ink on your skin is probable cause. A scarlet letter that marks you for suspicion. You see young men being pulled aside, their shirts yanked up as officers scrutinize their bodies for any mark that could be interpreted as a gang symbol. It's a strange and cruel irony, a quirky tidbit of this time that artistic expression or youthful rebellion from years past could now land you in a legal black hole. Suddenly, that dragon you got tattooed on your back when you were 19 doesn't seem like such a cool idea anymore. It's more like a bullseye. You hear the stories whispered among neighbors, a son taken because he was seen talking to a known gang member, once a cousin arrested because an anonymous caller denounced him, perhaps to settle an old score or to get a rival out of the way. The government set up a hotline for citizens to report gang activity, a well-intentioned tool that was quickly weaponized for personal vendettas. Rights groups and sociologists still debate whether the mass arrests were a calculated strategy to dismantle gang structures or an indiscriminate show of force designed to terrorize communities into submission, creating a chilling effect through sheer volume. Was every single person arrested a hardened criminal, or were thousands of innocent people caught in the crossfire sacrificed to the god of statistics? The numbers are staggering. Within weeks, tens of thousands are arrested. The country's already overcrowded prisons are swamped. Makeshift detention centers spring up in schools and public buildings. The legal system grinds to a halt, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of cases. Young men are hauled before judges in mass hearings, dozens at a time, their cases heard in minutes, without any meaningful legal representation. The presumption of innocence is a forgotten luxury. The new math of Salvadoran justice is simple: arrest first, ask questions later. Maybe the process becomes a grim production line. You see the images on the news and on the president's own social media feeds, endless lines of shirtless men with their hands cuffed behind their backs, their heads bowed, forced into submissive poses for the camera. It's a performance, a piece of political theater designed to show the public and the world that the war is being won. It's a more aggressive form of door-to-door service, only instead of selling you something, they're taking someone away, usually a son, a brother, or a father. The social fabric of communities begins to unravel, frayed by the constant raids and the climate of suspicion. People you've known your whole life become wary strangers, afraid that a casual conversation could be misconstrued. The silence that falls over the neighborhoods is not one of peace, but of fear, a tense quiet where everyone is watching and everyone is being watched. And as the number of detainees swells past 10,000, then 20, then 30, a new problem emerges, a logistical nightmare for the state. Where do you put them? All the old prisons were already bursting at the seams. They were the universities of crime that Bukele had vowed to shut down. You can't just keep stuffing more and more people into these failing institutions. The answer to that question was already being formulated in secret plan for a new kind of prison, a place so vast, so secure, so inescapable that it would be more than just a jail. It would be a tomb for the living. A concrete monster was being conceived to swallow this tidal wave of humanity, whole, a place from which there would be no return. While the great Roundup was in full public view, a different kind of project was taking shape in the shadows, far from the prying eyes of the media and the public, in a secluded rural area near the town of Tecoluca, a place once known for its quiet farms and sprawling cotton fields. A monumental secret was being poured into the earth, one truckload of concrete at a time. This was the genesis of CECOT, the Center for the Confinement of Terrorism, Projects shrouded in a level of secrecy you'd normally associate with a clandestine military base, not a correctional facility. You wouldn't have known it was being built if you drove by. The government chose the location with strategic precision. It was isolated, remote, and easily secured, far from major population centers where protests or media scrutiny could interfere. They quietly purchased a huge tract of land, and the construction began under a veil of national security. The workers who built it were reportedly required to sign non-disclosure agreements, and the perimeter was patrolled by heavily armed soldiers long before the first wall was even erected. It was a ghost project, a rumor whispered among locals who saw convoys of construction vehicles rumbling down their country roads at all hours of the day and night. The scale of the operation was immense. It had to be. President Bukele didn't just want a new prison, he wanted a symbol, a monument to his iron-fisted campaign, a place that would broadcast a message of absolute control to the gangs and to the world. He envisioned a facility so large and so intimidating that its very existence would serve as a deterrent, a concrete manifestation of his promise to eradicate the Maras. It was built at a speed that was almost unbelievable, a logistical feat that seemed to defy the normal pace of government bureaucracy. The entire megastructure, from groundbreaking to completion, took only 7 months, a mainstream historical fact that underscores the immense political will and resources funneled into the project. It was a national priority on par with a wartime mobilization, because in Bukele's eyes this was a war. For comparison, a new shopping mall can take years to build. This was a small city of concrete and steel conjured from the earth in less time than it takes to get through a full sports season. The government was cagey about the details, the cost, the contractors, the exact specifications. It was all classified information. This secrecy fueled speculation and fear. Human rights organizations and opposition politicians raised alarms, but their voices were drowned out by the chorus of public approval for the government's security crackdown. The average Salvadoran wasn't concerned with procurement processes or transparency. They were concerned with the fact that for the first time in a generation, they could walk home from work without paying an extortion fee to a teenage gangster. This is the point where you feel the sheer audacity of the plan. It's one thing to declare a state of exception, it's another thing entirely to build a custom-made abyss for 40,000 people. It's like discovering your quiet neighbor isn't just building a garden shed, he's constructing a private black site. The quirky tidbit that emerged during this period was the government's almost gleeful use of social media to tease the project. President Bukele himself would post cryptic messages and aerial photos of the construction site, a sort of macabre marketing campaign for what would become the largest prison in the Americas. He was building a concrete monster, and he was turning it into a viral sensation, a masterclass in political branding. For the digital age, scholars and political scientists continue to debate the long-term political implications of such a project. Was the secrecy surrounding CECOT's construction a necessary measure to prevent gang interference, or was it a deliberate tactic to bypass democratic oversight and accountability? The answer likely lies somewhere in between, but the result was the same. A state-of-the-art fortress rose from the Salvadoran countryside with almost no public debate or scrutiny. As the final touches were put on the facility, the government prepared for the big reveal, the grand unveiling of its crown jewel of punishment. The secrecy was about to be replaced by a carefully orchestrated media spectacle. The world was about to see what El Salvador's new philosophy of justice looked like in concrete and steel. The rumors of a megaprison were about to become a stark and terrifying reality. The silence from the construction site was a low hum of machinery, but it was about to be replaced by a different kind of sound, the sound of thousands of shuffling feet, the clanging of steel doors, and the quiet hum of a system of total control. The monster was built, it was hungry, and it was waiting to be fed. The nation held its breath, waiting to see inside the belly of the beast. And then President Bukele himself, in his signature style, took to the airwaves and social media To give the world a personal tour, the video was slick, professionally produced with a dramatic soundtrack and sweeping drone shots. It wasn't a press conference. It was a Hollywood-style reveal, a real estate showing for a house of horrors, and you're invited to look inside. The first thing that strikes you is the sheer scale of it, the brutalism of its design. CECOT is not a place that bothers with the niceties of rehabilitative architecture. It's a machine for holding bodies, a monument to incapacitation. The aesthetic is stark, oppressive, and aggressively functional. The dominant colors are gray and white, the colors of concrete and bone. From the air, it looks like a vast circuit board, a sprawling complex of identical rectangular buildings laid out in a ruthlessly geometric pattern, surrounded by layers upon layers of security. The design philosophy is clear. There is no escape, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. This is a place built to break the human spirit. You follow the camera as it glides through the gates, past the watchtowers, and along the high concrete walls topped with electrified fences and razor wire, lots and lots of razor wire. It glistens in the sun like a thorny crown on this concrete king. The prison is designed as a series of nested security zones, each one harder to breach than the last. To get from the outside world to a cell you would have to pass through multiple steel gate scanners and checkpoints, each manned by heavily armed guards. It's a fortress within a fortress, a Russian doll of confinement, a mainstream historical fact being that its design was overseen by Salvadoran military and penal experts with consultation from international security firms, though the specifics of who they were remains a closely guarded secret. The goal was to eliminate the weaknesses of the old prison system, where inmates could effectively run entire cell blocks. Here, the architecture itself is the warden. The buildings are made of reinforced concrete designed to withstand riots or attempts to smash through walls. The cell doors are not bars that you can see through. They are solid steel plates with a small slot for food and observation. This is a key design choice. It's about sensory deprivation, about isolating inmates, not just from the outside world, but from each other. It's a quirky tidbit of the design that there are no recreational areas in the traditional sense. No soccer fields, no gyms, no workshops. This isn't a place for rehabilitation. It's a place for storage. The only time an inmate leaves their cell is for a hearing, which happens via video conference, or for disciplinary reasons, a trip to an even more isolated punishment cell. There is no sunlight in the cells, no view of the sky. It's a world of artificial light and recycled air 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The sleeping arrangements are a chilling vision of efficiency. Each cell is a concrete box about 100 square meters designed to hold around 80 inmates. There are no beds, no mattresses, just 3 tiers of bare metal platforms stretching from wall to wall. It's human shelving. It's less like a bedroom and more like the inventory section of a dystopian warehouse, a place where you can almost hear the sarcastic tour guide in your head saying, "Plenty of legroom if you're a flamingo," and sleep standing up. The plumbing is minimal, a couple of toilets and sinks for 80 men, guaranteeing a constant state of filth and degradation. Historians of penology and architecture still argue whether such brutalist designs genuinely reduce prison violence and disorder, or if they merely suppress it while creating a psychological pressure cooker that leads to more severe mental health crises among the inmate population. The entire facility is a testament to technological control. Hundreds of cameras monitor every corner, every hallway, every cell. The guards in their central control rooms can watch everything on a bank of screens. Like gods playing a grim version of The Sims, they can lock and unlock doors, remotely control the water and electricity, and communicate with inmates only through intercoms. The human element is deliberately minimized. The system is designed to run on its own logic, a logic of total surveillance and absolute power. As the presidential tour concludes, you're left with a sense of cold awe. It's an engineering marvel, a masterpiece of carceral design, but it's also a terrifying vision of the future of punishment, a place where human beings are reduced to data points on a screen, numbers in a system, inputs to be controlled. The concrete monster has a face now, and it is stark, unblinking, and utterly devoid of mercy. The message is loud and clear: if you end up here, you will be forgotten by the sun. The sky and the world, the stage is set. The cells are empty and waiting. The only thing missing is the cast of 40,000. The arrival of the first inmates was not a quiet administrative process. It was a meticulously choreographed spectacle of power and humiliation, a public ritual designed to be seen by the entire world. President Bukele once again leveraged the power of social media, releasing a stunning video that immediately went viral. You watch it not like a news report, but like a scene from a grim, futuristic movie. The day begins before dawn in the old, overcrowded prisons. The chosen inmates are roused from their sleep. They are the first batch, the inaugural residents of CECOT, 2,000 of them, all identified by the authorities as high-ranking members of MS 13 and Barrio 18. The process is one of systematic degradation. First, they are stripped down to a uniform of simple white shorts, their chests and backs a canvas of gang tattoos that once signified power and terror, but now serve only as a barcode marking them for this specific fate. Then, their heads are shaved, another act of stripping away their old identity, their individuality, their vanity. They are made uniform, interchangeable. Then comes the procession. You see them herded out of their old cells, barefooted, hands cuffed behind their backs, forced to run a gauntlet of heavily armed guards. They are bent over at the waist, a position of forced submission, their faces pressed towards the ground. They are packed tightly together, a river of pale skin and dark tattoos flowing through the prison corridors. The sheer number of them is overwhelming, a sea of humanity being driven like livestock. The guards are stark contrast, clad in black tactical gear, their faces hidden by helmets and balaclavas. They are an anonymous force of state power, shouting orders, their voices amplified by the echoing concrete halls. There's a palpable sense of menace in the air, a feeling that any sign of resistance would be met with overwhelming force. A quirky tidbit that observers noted was the almost cinematic quality of the government's footage, the slow-motion shots, the dramatic angles, the pulsating soundtrack. It was state propaganda for the Instagram age, turning a human rights controversy into a viral video that felt more like a trailer for a blockbuster action film than a document of a prisoner transfer. The motorcade that transports them is an impressive display of military might. Buses with blacked-out windows are flanked by armored vehicles, and helicopters circle overhead. The entire operation is conducted with a level of security befitting the transfer of a small army. The message is clear: the state is in absolute control. The gangs no longer run the show. Even the logistics of their own imprisonment are now a display of the government's power. The arrival at CECOT is the climax of this ritual. The buses pull up to the gates, and the men are unloaded one by one. They are forced to run again barefoot across the hot asphalt into the receiving area of the new prison. Inside they are lined up in vast empty halls, their bodies still bent, their heads still bowed. They are made to sit on the cold concrete floor in tightly packed rows, their legs intertwined, creating a human tapestry of defeat and surrender. You see the guards walking among them, their boots inches from the inmates' faces. The silence is punctuated only by the barked orders of the officers and the quiet shuffling of thousands of bare feet. It's a powerful image of subjugation, a mainstream historical fact that the public display of shackled and subjugated prisoners has been a tool of state power for centuries. From Roman triumphs to the chain gangs of the American South, Bukele was tapping into a deep historical tradition of public shaming and deterrence. The processing is swift and impersonal. They are searched again, photographed again, and then finally led to their new homes. The concrete cells you saw in the presidential tour, the video shows them being shoved into the cavernous rooms, the solid steel doors slamming shut one after another, a sound of finality, a metallic full stop on their old lives. The final shot of the government's video is of a cell packed with men, some standing, some sitting on the bare metal bunks, their faces a mixture of confusion, defiance, and resignation. The camera lingers on them for a moment before the steel door closes, plunging them into the dim artificial light that will be their world from now on. Scholars of criminology and sociology still argue whether such public displays of prisoner degradation are an effective deterrent to crime, or if they simply serve to dehumanize a population and normalize brutal state practices, making future abuses more palatable to the public. The first 2,000 had arrived. CECOT, the concrete monster, had received its first meal, and it was just the beginning. 38,000 more were slated to follow. The world watched in a mixture of horror and fascination. A new chapter in the history of incarceration had begun, written in steel, concrete, and the subjugated bodies of thousands of men. Now you are inside. The steel door has slammed shut, and the echo has faded, leaving a silence that is heavier than any sound you've ever heard. You are one of 80 men in a concrete box measuring roughly 10 by 12 meters. The air is already thick with the smell of unwashed body sweat and a faint chemical tang from the toilets in the corner. Your personal space has been reduced to the width of your own shoulders. The world outside has vanished, replaced by the gray walls, the gray floor, the gray ceiling, and the dim, unwavering glow of the fluorescent lights that are never turned off. There is no day or night in here, only a perpetual twilight, a timeless state of being that begins to warp your perception of reality. Immediately, the first thing you have to do is find a spot, a place to exist in this human Tetris game. The bunks are three-tiered metal slabs, cold and unyielding. There are no mattresses, no pillows, no blankets, just the bare metal. Your uniform is a pair of thin white shorts, and that's it. The lucky ones, the first ones in the cell, grab a spot on the bunks. The rest cram onto the floor, a chaotic jumble of limbs and torsos. You find a small patch of concrete, your patch, and you sit guarding it with a quiet intensity, because in here space is the only currency that matters. A day in CECOT is a study in crushing monotony, a script that never changes. The routine is designed to eliminate thought, to break the will through sheer repetition. There are no activities, no work, no programs, no distractions. There's only waiting, the day, if you can call it, that is marked by two events: the distribution of food. A slot in the steel door opens and trays are passed through. The meal is simple and Spartan: a scoop of rice, some beans, maybe a piece of bread, and a cup of water. You eat it quickly, silently, because there is nothing else to do. The food is just fuel to keep the machine of your body running. It's not for pleasure or for comfort. After the meal, the emptiness returns. You sit or you lie down on your piece of metal or concrete. You can try to talk to the men around you, but conversations are muted, hushed. The guards are always listening through the intercoms, and any loud noise or sign of agitation can bring punishment, a beating, a trip to an even more isolated cell, or the temporary cutting off of water to your cells. Toilets, a quirky tidbit of this existence, is the invention of new pastimes from pure nothingness. Men might spend hours studying the patterns in the concrete on the ceiling or counting the rivets on the metal bunks. They create mental games to keep their minds from imploding from the sheer lack of stimulus. You learn to live inside your own head, but it's a dangerous neighborhood in here, full of memories and fears that you can no longer escape. The sanitation is a constant struggle. 2 toilets and 2 sinks for 80 men. The math is brutal, and the reality is worse. The toilets are perpetually fouled. The sinks are a source of constant tension as men jostle for a chance to wash their face or hands. The water is controlled by the guards. It can be shut off at any time as a form of collective punishment for the perceived infraction of a single inmate, a mainstream historical fact in many supermax-style prisons where basic amenities are weaponized as tools of control. You feel a layer of grime forming on your skin, a permanent film that you can never quite wash away. The psychological toll is immense. The lack of sunlight disrupts your circadian rhythm. You lose track of time. Are you sleeping for 10 minutes or 2 hours? Have you been here for 3 weeks or 3 months? The constant light, the constant noise of 80 men breathing, coughing, and murmuring creates a low-level sensory assault that never ends. And then there is the boredom, a profound, soul-crushing boredom that eats away at you. It's a physical presence, an invisible weight that presses down on your chest. You feel your mind starting to fray at the edges. Memories begin to blur. Thoughts become repetitive, a looping track of despair. Historians and psychologists still argue about the long-term effects of extreme sensory and social deprivation, but the consensus is that it can lead to severe and often permanent psychological damage, including psychosis, depression, and a complete breakdown of personality. You try to hold on to who you were before you came here. You replay memories of your family, your friends, the taste of your favorite food, the feeling of the sun on your skin, but the memories start to fade, their colors washed out by the perpetual gray of your new reality. It's a kind of joke, a cosmic prank. You're in a cell with 79 other people, but you've never felt so completely and utterly alone. The guards remain a faceless presence. You rarely see them. You only hear their disembodied voices over the intercom or see their shadows through the small observation window in the door. They are the ghosts in this machine, the unseen operators of your personal hell. Your world has shrunk to this concrete box, and the 80 strangers within it. This isn't living, it's warehousing. This is a day inside CECOT, and tomorrow will be exactly the same, and the day after that, and the day after that, stretching into an endless gray horizon. In this new world of concrete and control, you are systematically stripped of everything that made you you. The process began the moment you were herded onto that bus, but inside CECOT it is perfected, it is institutionalized. The most obvious and immediate loss is your name. You are no longer Juan or Carlos or Miguel. You are a number, a sequence of digits assigned to you upon arrival, a number that is now your sole identifier in this vast anonymous system. The guards don't call you by your name. They shout your number over the intercom when they need you to step forward for a count or a search. Your humanity is reduced to a line item in a spreadsheet, a data point in the fortress's operating system. This is more than just an administrative convenience. It's a profound psychological tool. The shaving of your head was the first step, the removal of your chosen hairstyle, a small but significant part of your identity. Now the removal of your name severs another tie to your past self, the tattoos that cover your body, the ink that once declared your allegiance. Your history, your loves, and your losses are now just evidence. They are part of the uniform of the damned, the very thing that brought you here. They are no longer a source of pride or intimidation. They are a brand, a permanent mark of your condemnation. You look at the other men in the cell, their bodies also covered in these elaborate chronicles of a life that no longer exists, and you see not individuals, but variations on a theme, a gallery of a single condemned identity. Every visual cue of individuality has been erased. You all wear the same white shorts. You all have the same shaved head. You all have the same gaunt look in your eyes, born of poor nutrition and a lack of sunlight. You are becoming interchangeable, a collection of identical units in a vast human inventory. It's a bit like the first day of a very, very bad job, where they give you a terrible uniform and a name badge with a number on it, except there are no coffee breaks, and the HR department is staffed by guards with riot shields. The clothes you were arrested in, the small trinkets you might have had in your pockets, a photograph, a cheap ring, a religious medallion, they are all gone, confiscated, and locked somewhere in a dusty storeroom. But you know you will never see them again. These small objects were anchors to your life outside. They were physical proof that you existed, that you were loved, that you had a history. Now your only possession is a pair of white shorts and your memories, and the latter are starting to feel less reliable with each passing day. The social structures that defined your life on the outside are also obliterated in the old prisons. The gangs recreated their hierarchies inside the walls. Leaders, or palabreros, held court, dispensing orders and maintaining control. CECOT's design is meant to shatter that, a mainstream historical fact being that mixing rival gang members within the same cell blocks is a deliberate strategy known as decliquing, aimed at breaking down established power structures and preventing organized resistance by throwing members of MS-13 and both factions of Barrio 18 into the same cells. The administration creates an environment of constant low-level tension and mistrust the old codes and allegiances become meaningless or even dangerous. In this new context, the man you would have called your brother on the street might now be a rival for a piece of floor space or a turn at. The CECOT guards are the only authority here. Their power is absolute, and they intentionally foster an atmosphere where solidarity is impossible. You are atomized, isolated, even in a crowd of 80 men. A quirky tidbit of prison sociology is the concept of the prison mask, the emotionless facial expression that inmates adopt to avoid showing weakness or attracting unwanted attention. In CECOT, this mask is not just a tool, it is a necessity. It is the default state of being. You learn to make your face a blank canvas, to give away nothing, to signal nothing. You become a ghost in your own body. Scholars in the field of carceral studies still debate the efficacy of such identity-stripping measures. Does it truly dismantle gang identity, or does it merely drive it underground, forcing it to mutate into new, more clandestine forms? Does it create a compliant prisoner, or does it create a more deeply damaged and resentful human being? The loss of identity is a creeping fog. It seeps into your bones. You start to forget the sound of your own full name spoken aloud. You catch your reflection in the metal of the sink, and for a fleeting moment, you don't recognize the gaunt, shorn-headed figure staring back at you. The person you were is becoming a character in a story you once read, not someone you actually were. The system is designed to make you forget him, to erase him, and replace him with this number, this body, this compliant unit in a white pair of shorts. It's a slow, insidious process of unmaking a person piece by piece, until all that is left is a shell, a vessel waiting for the next order, the next meal, the next empty day to pass. In the perpetual gray twilight, the men who hold the keys to this gray kingdom are as much a part of the architecture as the concrete and steel. They are the living components of the machine of CECOT. And from your position on the floor of your cell, they are less like men and more like apparitions. You rarely see a full face. They are perpetually hidden behind black balaclavas and dark riot visors, making them an anonymous, interchangeable force of pure authority. Their fashion sense is strictly dystopian chic, a uniform of black tactical gear, body armor, and heavy combat boots that thud on the polished concrete with a sound that announces their presence long before you see their silhouette through the small window in your door. They move with the disciplined economy of motion, a rigid posture that speaks of military training, not the casual slouch of a typical prison guard. These are not just corrections officers, they are soldiers deployed in a domestic war zone, a key part of Bukele's strategy. The militarization of the prison system is a mainstream historical fact seen in many countries facing extreme internal security threats, where the line between soldier and law enforcement becomes blurred. This isn't just a job. For them, it's a deployment, and you are the enemy combatant. They are the gatekeepers, the enforcers, the human wall that stands between you and a world you are beginning to forget even exists. Your only direct interaction with them is through disembodied voices crackling over an intercom, ordering a head count, or announcing the arrival of food. Their tone is always flat, devoid of emotion or inflection. They are the voice of the system, cold and impersonal as a computer. You wonder what it's like to be them, to walk these sterile corridors for a 12-hour shift, to breathe the same recycled air, but to have the freedom to leave at the end of the day. You imagine their world, stark contrast to yours, a world of bright control rooms filled with the soft glow of hundreds of video monitors. They see everything. They have more camera angles on you than the season finale of a reality television show, watching your every move, every gesture, every moment of despair. They are the all-seeing eyes of this concrete god, and their gaze is constant and unwavering. You try to picture them at home without the mask and the uniform. Do they have families? Do they laugh at jokes? Do they worry about paying their bills? Or is the coldness they project here something they carry with them back into the outside world? A quirky tidbit from the world of high-security corrections is the specialized psychological training guards receive to create and maintain emotional distance They are often trained to refer to inmates only by their numbers and to consciously avoid making eye contact or engaging in any form of personal conversation. This isn't just about professionalism, it's a survival mechanism, a way to build a mental callus to protect their own humanity from the corrosive environment of constant suspicion and potential violence. The job posting probably didn't list professional ghost as a key responsibility, but that is what they have become. They are trained to see you not as a person, but as a problem, to be managed, a unit, to be controlled, an object, to be stored. Criminologists and sociologists continue to debate the long-term psychological impact on security personnel who work in such total control institutions. Does the strict discipline and dehumanizing protocol protect them from trauma, or does it lead to higher rates of burnout, post-traumatic stress, and a blunting of their own empathy that spills over into their personal lives? The guards of CECOT are on the front line of that very debate, their own minds being the test subjects in this grand experiment. You see the result of their training in their chilling efficiency. There are no moments of casual cruelty, no personal vendettas that you might have seen in older prisons. The violence here, if it comes, is swift, impersonal, and systematic. It's the application of a procedure, not the outburst of an angry man. This detachment is perhaps more terrifying than overt brutality, because it feels inescapable. You cannot appeal to the humanity of a system. You are a threat to be managed, and they are the managers. They patrol the catwalks above the cell blocks, their shadows gliding over you like birds of prey. They conduct the sudden unannounced cell searches, tossing what little order you have created into chaos. Their movements are precise and methodical. They are the physical manifestation of the prison's will, a will that is absolute and unbending. In a strange way, they are prisoners too, captive for their entire shift in this same joyless environment. Their reality is also one of concrete walls and artificial light. They are cogs in the same machine, just a different part with a different function. They are the shepherds of this flock of 40,000 lost souls, tasked with ensuring the silence and stillness of the tomb, and the weight of that task must be as heavy as the steel doors they lock behind them. The architecture of CECOT is the first line of defense. Its brutalist design, a clear statement of intent, but it's the layers of technology and physical barriers woven into that design that make it a true fortress, a place where the very idea of escape is an absurdity. You don't even have the energy to entertain. Your world is a box, but that box is nested within a series of increasingly formidable containers, like a set of grim Russian dolls made of concrete and steel. The first layer, beyond your solid steel cell door, is the cell block itself, a long cavernous hall that you never get to see in its entirety. You only know it as a source of distant noise, the echoing clang of other doors, the muffled shouts of guards, a soundscape of confinement from above on unseen catwalks. The guards patrol, their footsteps a metronome, marking the slow passage of your sentence. Beyond the cell block is the first of many perimeter walls, a towering edifice of reinforced concrete, so high that it blocks out any view of the surrounding landscape, even if you had a window, which you don't. These walls are a mainstream historical fact in modern supermax prison design, often sunk deep into the ground to prevent tunneling, a tactic that seems laughably optimistic from your perspective, as you don't even have a spoon, let alone an industrial digging machine. You feel these walls, even though you can't see them. Their presence is a crushing weight, a physical manifestation of the end of the world, a hard stop beyond which nothing exists for you. An almost quirky tidbit is the sheer variety and density of the fencing. The concrete walls aren't enough. They are crowned with a glittering tiara of razor wire and electrified fences. The designers seem to have a more is more philosophy when it came to things that can cut or shock you. Imagine every scary fence from every action movie you've ever seen layered one on top of the other. That's the starting point for CECOT's perimeter. It's not just one fence, it's a series of them, creating a no man's land. Between the walls, a kill zone monitored by motion sensors and cameras, where any unauthorized presence would trigger an immediate and overwhelming response. This zone is probably a great place to get a tan if you also enjoy being electrocuted and apprehended simultaneously. Between these layers of physical barriers is a web of technological surveillance that is even more inescapable. The entire compound is under the unblinking gaze of hundreds of high-definition cameras. They are everywhere, in the cell blocks, in the hallways, on the walls. In the corners of every ceiling. They see everything, every whisper, every movement. You are the star of the world's most boring reality show, and the viewership is a team of guards in a distant control room. This surveillance is augmented by other technology, scanners for weapons and contraband at every entry point, jammers that block all cell phone signals, making the old prison trick of a smuggled phone completely useless. The fortress is a digital dead zone, a black hole for any electronic communication with the outside world. The guards in their central command hub are the masters of this technological domain. They are like the Wizards of Oz behind the curtain, pulling the levers that control your entire existence. They monitor the camera feeds, the motion detectors, the electronic locks on every door in the facility. The level of control is granular. They can isolate a single cell or an entire cell block with the push of a button. They control your water, your light, your access to everything beyond your own skin. Historians and security experts still argue over the human factor. In such technologically advanced facilities, can technology truly replace the need for well-trained and engaged staff, or does an over-reliance on tech create a false sense of security and new unforeseen vulnerabilities? For now, the system at CECOT seems to have found a terrifying equilibrium between human enforcers and their technological tools, all working in concert to create a seamless cage. The layers are not just physical, they are auditory. You are sealed in a world of controlled sound. The thick concrete walls muffle any noise from the outside world. There are no birds, no traffic, no distant laughter, just the internal hum of the prison's life support systems and the sounds of your fellow inmates. This acoustic isolation is another tool to sever your connection to reality, to make the world outside feel like a distant dream, a place that may not even exist anymore. You lie on your metal slab, and you try to imagine what it would take to breach these layers. You'd have to somehow get through a solid steel door, past the guards on the catwalks, through a massive concrete wall, navigate a maze of electrified razor wire fences, all while being watched by hundreds of cameras and motion sensors. The thought is so preposterous, it's almost comical. It's less of an escape plan and more of a multi-stage extreme sport, for which you have not trained. The layers of steel and wire are not just a security system, they are a form of psychological warfare, a constant reminder of your powerlessness. They are the physical grammar of your sentence, and they spell out a single repeating word. Never. The physical confinement of CECOT is absolute, but the true battleground, the place where the war is won or lost, is inside your own skull. The architects of this place understood that a body can resist, but a broken mind is a compliant one, and the entire environment is meticulously engineered to wage a relentless war on your psyche. The primary weapon in this war is sensory control, the deliberate manipulation of what you see, hear, and feel to create a state of perpetual disorientation and stress. The most powerful tool is the light. Your cell is bathed in the constant, unwavering glow of fluorescent bulbs 24 hours a day. A mainstream historical fact is that prolonged exposure to continuous artificial light is a recognized technique of psychological pressure used in interrogations and detentions around the world. It completely severs your connection to the natural rhythm of day and night. Your body's internal clock, the circadian rhythm, is thrown into chaos. You lose all sense of time. Is it morning, noon, or the dead of night? The world outside is measured by the rising and setting of the sun, but your world has no sun. It only has the hum. You sleep in fits and starts, never achieving the deep restorative rest that a mind needs to stay healthy. The constant light is a form of low-level torture, a persistent nagging presence that you can never escape. Even when you close your eyes, you can see the white glare through your eyelids. Then there's the sound, or rather the lack of it. The thick concrete walls create an acoustic dead zone cutting you off from the sounds of nature and normal life. But the silence is not peaceful. It's filled with the unsettling symphony of confinement, the metallic clang of distant doors, the disembodied voice from the intercom, the coughing and muttering of 79 other men, and the constant low hum of the ventilation system. This white noise of the prison becomes the soundtrack to your existence, a maddeningly repetitive loop that grinds away at your sanity. A quirky and unsettling tidbit of psychology is the Ganzfeld effect, a phenomenon where the brain, when starved of meaningful sensory input, starts to generate its own. It begins to hallucinate in the perpetual gray twilight of your cell under the constant hum. Your mind might start to play tricks on you. You might see shadows move in the corners of your eyes, or hear whispers that aren't there. Your own brain, desperate for stimulation, begins to eat itself. This sensory deprivation is paired with its opposite, sensory overload, the crushing proximity of so many other bodies, the constant smell of sweat and poor sanitation, the feeling of never being truly alone, yet being profoundly isolated. This creates a state of permanent tension. Your personal space is non-existent, and your nervous system is always on high alert, a state of fight or flight that never resolves. This sustained stress floods your body with cortisol, the stress hormone, which over time degrades both physical and mental health, making you more susceptible to illness and less able to think clearly. You find your thoughts becoming circular and obsessive. You might spend hours fixated on a single negative memory or a trivial detail of your confinement, like a crack in the ceiling. This mental looping is a common response to trauma and isolation, a sign that your mind is getting stuck, unable to process the overwhelming stress of your situation. It's a bit like having the world's worst song stuck in your head, but the song is just a feeling of dread, and it's on repeat forever. Human rights advocates and psychologists still debate the ethical lines of carceral architecture. Can a prison be so perfectly designed to inflict psychological harm that it constitutes a form of cruel and unusual punishment, even without overt acts of physical violence? CECOT exists at the very edge of that debate, a living experiment in the power of an environment to dismantle a personality. You feel your emotional range begin to narrow. Highs and lows are smoothed out into a single flat line of weary resignation. Hope is a dangerous fantasy, so you learn to suppress it. Defiance is pointless, so you let it go. You are being conditioned like one of Pavlov's dogs, but instead of salivating at the sound of a bell, you are being trained to feel nothing, to expect nothing, to be nothing. The mental warfare is subtle and insidious. It's not a physical blow that you can brace for. It's a slow erosion, a constant drip of disorientation and stress that wears you down day by day, week by week, until the person you once were is just a faint echo in the noisy silence of your own mind, and you are left alone with the hum and the light, while you are lost in the timeless gray twilight of your cell. The world outside has not forgotten about CECOT. In fact, it is watching with a mixture of fascination and profound alarm. The construction of the megaprison and the mass arrests that filled it sent shockwaves through the international community, igniting a fierce global debate about human rights, justice, and the price of security. Almost as soon as President Bukele released his slickly produced videos showcasing the subjugation of the first inmates, human rights organizations began to sound the alarm. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, they all issued scathing reports condemning the situation in El Salvador. You can't see these reports, you can't hear the news, but their words paint a grim picture of your reality. They use phrases like a flagrant violation of international law, a recipe for tragedy, and mass due process violations. They document the arbitrary arrests, the lack of legal counsel, the inhumane conditions of detention, and the potential for torture and extrajudicial killings. They argue that while the state has a right to protect its citizens from gang violence, it cannot do so by dismantling the very foundations of justice and human dignity. Their outcry is loud and persistent, a chorus of condemnation from Geneva to New York. These organizations, a mainstream historical fact, have long served as the world's conscience, monitoring and reporting on abuses of power in an attempt to hold governments accountable. Their reports are not legally binding, but they carry significant moral weight and can influence foreign policy and international aid. The accusations are specific and damning. They point to the vague nature of the state of exception, which allows for the arrest of people based on their appearance or on anonymous and often unverified tips. They highlight the deaths in custody. Dozens of inmates who have died in the overcrowded prison system since the crackdown began, succumbing to disease, violence, or lack of medical care. They raise concerns about the very existence of CECOT facility, whose design seems purpose-built for mistreatment and the complete denial of basic human rights. It's a quirky and sad irony that the very tattoos that marked you as a terrorist in the eyes of the Salvadoran government are now being cited by international observers as a reason for your vulnerability. You were profiled and imprisoned based on your appearance, a clear violation of legal principles that are supposed to be universal. The Bukele government's response to this global outcry is not one of contrition or negotiation. It is one of defiance and nationalistic pride. President Bukele and his officials dismissed the criticism as the meddling of out-of-touch foreigners who do not understand the reality of life in a country terrorized by gangs. They framed the debate as a choice between the human rights of the criminals and the human rights of the decent people, a powerful and effective rhetorical strategy that resonates deeply with a population that has suffered for so long. Bukele himself takes to Twitter his favorite political weapon to mock his critics. He calls them puppets of the global elite and accuses them of defending the very monsters he is trying to lock away. His supporters rally behind him, flooding social media with messages of support for their president's iron fist, creating an echo chamber of nationalist fervor. International legal scholars and diplomats still argue about the effectiveness of naming and shaming as a human rights tool. Does public condemnation force authoritarian-leaning governments to change course, or does it often backfire, causing them to double down on their policies and rally their domestic base against perceived foreign interference? El Salvador under Bukele has become a prime case study for the latter. The government's messaging is a joke to its international critics, but it's a powerful narrative at home, a narrative of a small, proud nation standing up to the world to solve its own problems in its own way. So, while you sit in your cell, being systematically stripped of your identity, you have become an international symbol. You are a talking point in a UN session, a case study in a human rights report, a headline in a foreign newspaper. You are at the center of a furious global argument about the very meaning of justice, but none of it reaches you. The concrete walls of CECOT are impermeable, not just to sunlight, but to the debates of the outside world. The global outcry is a storm raging miles away over an ocean you cannot see, and whose winds you cannot feel. Your reality remains the same: 80 men in a box, the hum of the lights, and the slow grinding down of your own mind. The world is arguing about you, but in here you are already forgotten. The global outcry you can't hear is a debate about your rights, but inside CECOT the only debate that matters has already been settled. The old rules are dead. The prison's most ambitious project is not the concrete or the steel, it's the systematic demolition of the prison code, the invisible laws and hierarchies that have governed penal institutions for centuries. In the old prisons, a gang was a lifeline. It was your family, your protection, your social security, your entire world. Now, it's an anchor that dragged you to the bottom of this concrete ocean, and the administration is making sure you can never use it to climb back to the surface. You see the social engineering at work every single moment of your monotonous day. The first and most brutal rule of the new system is forced integration, the deliberate mixing of rival gangs in the same cell. A mainstream historical fact of gang life is the violent territorial segregation that defines their existence on the streets and in traditional prisons. CECOT throws that rulebook into a furnace. The man sleeping on the metal slab above you, the one whose face is inches from yours, might be from a rival clique of your own gang or worse, a sworn enemy from MS-13 or Barrio 18, someone you would have been honor-bound to kill on sight in your previous life. Now, is your roommate, your neighbor, your unwilling partner in this claustrophobic existence? It's the ultimate force group project, and the only grade is survival. The tension is a constant thrum beneath the surface, a quiet potential for violence that is only kept in check by the certainty of overwhelming retaliation from the guards and the sheer exhausting misery of your shared condition. The old hatreds haven't vanished. They've just been put on mute, suppressed by a greater and more immediate oppression. The second tool is the eradication of communication. The entire prison is a dead zone for the gang's intricate messaging systems. In the old world, information flowed through kites. Secret notes passed from hand to hand through complex verbal codes and through a rich vocabulary of hand signals and body language. Here, that's impossible. The solid steel doors prevent any visual contact with adjacent cells. The constant surveillance means any attempt at sign language is instantly spotted and punished. Even whispering is a risk. The guards' disembodied voices on the intercom frequently bark orders for silence. The gang's internal messaging system now has worse reception than the cell phone in a basement. A quirky tidbit of high-security prisons is the incredible ingenuity inmates have shown in creating communication methods, from tapping out codes on pipes to even developing languages based on the pattern of blinking. CECOT's design is an attempt to be the final word in that cat-and-mouse game by making observation total and privacy non-existent. The leaders, the palabreros, who once ran entire neighborhoods with a single phone call, are now just isolated men lost in the sea of 40,000 shaved heads. Their authority evaporates without the ability to communicate their orders. They are generals with no army, no radio, and no battlefield. Criminologists and penologists still argue whether completely eradicating internal hierarchies leads to a more manageable prison population or simply creates a more volatile and unpredictable environment where violence is disorganized and random rather than strategic. Here it seems to have created a social vacuum, a state of profound anomie, where every man is for himself. You learn to trust no one because the man next to you could be a rival, an informant, or just someone who will snap under the pressure. You are surrounded by men, yet you are utterly alone. You remember that perpetual gray twilight we talked about? It's the perfect atmosphere for this new social order, a place where shadows of suspicion can grow in the absence of the clear light of trust. This atomization is the goal. You are not a member of a fearsome Mara anymore. You are just a number in a pair of white shorts, stripped of your rank, your power, and your social identity. The code is broken, the language is forgotten, and the invisible empire that terrorized a nation has been reduced to a collection of isolated, frightened men who share a toilet. The prison suggestion box is probably a paper shredder, because there are no suggestions to be made, and no one left to make them on behalf of a group. The very concept of the gang is being unwritten one soul-crushing day at a time, while you and 39,999 others are being unmade in the gray void of CECOT. A very different story is unfolding on the outside, one that explains why the global outcry falls on deaf ears. Within El Salvador, President Nayib Bukele isn't just winning his war on gangs, he's winning the hearts and minds of his people on a scale that is almost unprecedented in modern politics. His approval ratings soar not just to comfortable majorities, but to stratospheric heights, often polling above 80 or even 90% numbers that most democratic leaders can only dream of. You become a strange kind of martyr, not for a cause you believe in, but for the cause of Bukele's spectacular political triumph. Your misery is the foundation upon which his popularity is built, and the vast majority of Salvadorans are more than happy with that trade-off. To understand this, you have to remember the before times, the constant fear, the daily extortion, the no-go zones that carved up cities into a patchwork of terror. For decades, Salvadorans prayed for a savior, and in their eyes one has finally Arrived Bukele's success lies in his ability to deliver a single tangible result that overshadows everything else: a dramatic and undeniable drop in violence. A mainstream historical fact is that in the year following the declaration of the state of exception, El Salvador's homicide rate plummeted by over 60%, transforming one of the world's most dangerous countries into one of the safest in Latin America overnight. This isn't just a statistic, it's a felt reality for the average citizen. It means their children can play in the street again. It means they can open a small business without fear of extortion. It means the sound of gunfire is no longer the nightly soundtrack to their lives. This newfound peace feels like a miracle, and people are immensely grateful to the man they see as its architect. Bukele's communication strategy is key. He is a master of political theater, and he has framed this entire campaign as an epic battle of good versus evil, with himself as the superhero protagonist and the gangs as cartoonish villains. His social media is a constant stream of triumphant posts, videos of captured gang members, slickly produced drone shots of CECOT, and defiant messages to his international critics. It's a bit like a political campaign that never ends, where every day brings a new victory lap. He has made himself synonymous with the country's security. A quirky tidbit of his leadership style is his self-branding as the world's coolest dictator, a tongue-in-cheek title he embraces on social media to troll his critics and delight his supporters. It's a joke that works, because for his base, he's not a dictator. He's a dad cleaning up the house with a firm hand, and they don't mind if he breaks a few dishes in the process. The international condemnation from human rights groups and foreign governments only seems to make him stronger. He expertly weaponizes this criticism, casting it as an attack on El Salvador's sovereignty by arrogant outsiders who don't understand their reality. He paints himself as David fighting the Goliath of the global establishment, and his people rally to his defense. Political scientists and commentators still debate whether Nayib Bukele's immense popularity represents a sustainable new model of governance or a dangerous populist bubble destined to burst once the initial euphoria of improved security wears off and the economic and social costs of his policies become more apparent. But for now, the bubble is very much intact. The opposition parties are in disarray, unable to offer a credible alternative. The traditional media is sidelined by Bukele's direct-to-the-people social media machine, and the judiciary and other state institutions have been systematically brought under his control, ensuring there are no checks on his power. He has effectively achieved what many strongmen before him have tried to do. He has made himself indispensable in the eyes of his people. Your suffering, and the suffering of tens of thousands like you, is the price of this new peace. It's a brutal calculation, but one that most Salvadorans are willing to make. The debate over due process and human rights seems like a distant academic argument when compared to the immediate visceral relief of being able to walk down the street without fear. Bukele has delivered on his most important promise, and in doing so, he has become more than a president. He has become a symbol of national rebirth, a controversial and authoritarian triumph built on the silence of 40,000 souls. The triumph you represent from inside your cell isn't just a political victory. For the president, it's a profound and jarring transformation of daily life. For the millions of Salvadorans living outside CECOT's walls, the change is so abrupt, so dramatic, that it feels almost surreal, as if the country woke up one morning to find that a decades-long storm had finally and inexplicably broken. You can't see it, you can't feel it, but the very air in the streets of San Salvador and in the small rural towns has changed. The thick, palpable tension that once defined existence has evaporated, replaced by a sense of lightness and possibility that feels utterly foreign. The most visible sign of this new era is the reclamation of public space. For years, parks, plazas, and even entire neighborhoods were off-limits, effectively owned and operated by the gangs. They were no-go zones where outsiders entered at their peril, and residents lived under a strict and violent code of conduct. Now you see families having picnics in parks that were once used as drug markets. Children fly kites in squares that were formerly the scenes of brutal turf wars. Street vendors set up their stalls without having to look over their shoulders, waiting for the weekly visit from the extortionist. The ubiquitous gang graffiti, the spiderweb of placas that marked territory and served as a constant visual reminder of who was in charge, is gone, scrubbed from the walls by government work crews and enthusiastic residents. It's a symbolic cleansing of visual representation of the new order, a mainstream historical fact that the removal of gang symbols from public view is a key tactic in post-conflict and security stabilization efforts aimed at breaking the psychological hold of armed groups over a community. The economy, a more subtle but equally important indicator, is also showing signs of life. Small businesses that had been shuttered for years, unable to bear the crushing weight of extortion payments, are reopening. The renta, the war tax that bled communities dry, has vanished. The bus driver, you remember, the one who had to pay a daily fee to the gangs, no longer has to. He can just do his job. The pupusa seller on the corner can keep her hard-earned money. People are investing in their homes and businesses again, a sign of a newfound confidence in the future. It's a simple thing, but it's profound. When you realize that for the first time in a generation, economic decisions are being driven by market forces, not by fear. A quirky tidbit of this transformation is the return of nightlife in cities like San Salvador. For years, the streets would empty out after dark as people rushed home to lock their doors. Now restaurants and bars are staying open later. There's music in the air. People are going for evening strolls. The simple act of being out and about after sunset is a defiant celebration of their reclaimed freedom. It's a collective exhale after decades of holding their breath. Sociologists and economists are now beginning to study the long-term effects of the security revolution. Will the dramatic drop in crime lead to sustainable economic growth and a stronger social fabric, or are there hidden costs to this new peace? The societal shift is not without its own complexities and anxieties. The fear of the gangs has been replaced by a different kind of caution, a wariness of the state. The heavy presence of soldiers and police on every corner is a constant reminder of the state of exception, a reminder that freedoms have been curtailed in the name of this new security. People are careful about what they say and who they say it to. A new kind of self-censorship takes hold, but for most it's a small price to pay. This is the world that has been built on your absence, your empty seat at the family dinner table. Your missing presence in your neighborhood is part of the cost of this new reality. You and the thousands like you are the ghosts that haunt this celebration, the silent sacrifice that made the peace possible. The people outside don't necessarily celebrate your suffering, but they have accepted it as a tragic necessity. They see the world in a stark binary, the peace they have now versus the hell they had before, and the choice is an easy one. The society outside has been transformed into something safer, more open, more hopeful. It is a country that has undergone a radical and painful surgery, cutting out a cancerous growth. And while the scars are deep and the methods controversial, the patient for the first time in a long time feels like it might actually survive, while the nation outside celebrates its newfound tranquility. You are not the only one paying the price for this peace back in a world that you are struggling to remember. A different kind of prison has been erected, one without walls of concrete, but with barriers of bureaucracy, grief, and crushing uncertainty. This is the prison inhabited by your family, your mother, your wife, your children, and tens of thousands of other families. Just like them, they are the forgotten casualties in this war, the collateral damage of the state of exception. For every man who vanished into the dragnet, there is a family left behind in the dark, grappling with a silence that is as profound as the one inside your cell. You try to picture them, your mother, her face etched with a worry that has aged her a decade in a few months, your wife, trying to hold everything together, being strong for the children, who keep asking when you are coming home, a question she has no answer for. Their lives have become a relentless cycle of waiting and searching. They join the long lines of other women, mostly mothers and wives, who gather outside the gates of prisons and government buildings, clutching faded photographs and scraps of paper. With your name on them, they are hoping for a scrap of information, a confirmation that you are alive, a clue as to where you are being held, but they are met with a wall of official indifference. The guards and officials they speak to are polite, but firm. They have no information. They say you must wait for the official process to unfold, a process that seems to have no beginning and no end. Getting a straight answer from this system is harder than finding a happy ending in a Russian novel, a true test of one's patience. The government has created an information black hole, a deliberate strategy, perhaps to manage the overwhelming scale of the detentions, or simply a symptom of a bureaucracy buckling under its own weight. A mainstream historical fact is that in times of state repression, women have often been at the forefront of the fight for information and justice, from the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo in Argentina, who marched silently for their disappeared children, to the new informal networks of Salvadoran women today. They share a common bond of loss and a fierce determination to find the truth. These women form their own communities of sorrow outside the prison gates. They share food, water, and rumors. They compare notes on which official might be helpful and which office is a dead end. A quirky and poignant tidbit of this crisis is the microeconomy that has sprung up around these vigils. People sell them phone top-ups so they can coordinate on WhatsApp groups, cheap meals, and bottles of water. It's the gig economy, but with a lot more heartbreak and a lot less venture capital. These women are not just grieving, they are fighting for survival. The arrest of a primary breadwinner, even one whose income may have been inconsistent or from questionable sources, plunges a family into immediate economic crisis. They struggle to pay rent, to buy food, to keep their children in school. The social safety net is shredded, and they are left to fend for themselves in a society that is largely unsympathetic. Sociologists and economists still debate whether mass incarceration ultimately stabilizes a society or simply creates a new permanent underclass of impoverished and traumatized families that will fuel future social problems. The stigma is a heavy burden as well. In a neighborhood celebrating the departure of the gangs, the family of an accused gang member is often viewed with suspicion or outright hostility. Friends and neighbors who are relieved by the new peace might shun them, afraid of being associated with the terrorists. Family, the joy on the street is a constant painful reminder of their own private tragedy. Your family is caught in an impossible limbo. They are not quite widows. They are not quite wives. They are ghosts in their own community, living a suspended life. Just like you are, they are serving a sentence of their own, a sentence of ambiguity and hardship on the outside, a sentence that has no end date. The peace that has settled over El Salvador is a peace they can see but cannot feel, because for them the war has just entered a new and more personal phase, a quiet, desperate struggle for answers, for survival, and for the memory of the man who was taken from them in the middle of the night. You exist in a state of suspended animation in a cell without a calendar, but your family on the outside exists in a different kind of limbo, a legal abyss where the normal rules of time and justice have been completely rewritten. The state of exception, which was initially sold as a temporary emergency measure, has been renewed again and again, month after month, becoming a de facto permanent state of affairs. This rolling emergency is the legal architecture that keeps you and tens of thousands of others trapped in a system with no clear exit. Your case, like countless others, is a file gathering dust in a system that has been deliberately overwhelmed. The sheer volume of arrests, over 70,000 in the first year alone, has completely swamped El Salvador's judicial system. A mainstream historical fact that demonstrates how mass arrest campaigns can effectively dismantle rule of law by creating a bottleneck that makes individual justice impossible. The courts are buried under an avalanche of cases. There are not enough judges, not enough prosecutors, not enough public defenders to handle the load. The result is a grim form of justice by attrition. You are not being tried and convicted. You are simply being held. The legal principle of innocent until proven guilty has been flipped on its head. Now you are guilty until you can somehow prove your innocence from inside a concrete box with no lawyer and no contact with the outside world. The hearings that do occur are often a tragic farce. Mass hearings have become the norm, where hundreds of inmates are brought before a judge via a glitchy video link from prison for a hearing that lasts only a few minutes. There is no time for individual arguments, no presentation of evidence, no meaningful legal defense. A single judge might process the cases of 500 detainees in a single day, a conveyor belt of justice that is all about speed and numbers, not about facts or fairness. It's less of a legal proceeding and more of an administrative update, confirming you're still in the system, a bit like renewing your driver's license online, but instead of a new license, you get another indefinite period of incarceration. A quirky and dark detail of this new legal reality is the rise of virtual justice. While the technology for remote hearings existed before the pandemic, it has been embraced by the Salvadoran state as a tool of efficiency, allowing them to process the unprecedented number of detainees without having to physically move them, which is a massive security and logistical challenge. You become a pixelated face on a screen, your fate decided by someone you will never meet in a room you will never enter. The legal basis for your detention is often terrifyingly thin. Under the state of exception, authorities can arrest you based on your appearance, a supposed gang-affiliated tattoo, an anonymous tip from a neighbor, or simply for living in a neighborhood known for gang activity. The evidence, if it exists at all, is often secret, and you have no right to see it or challenge it. You are accused of belonging to an illicit group, a broad and vague charge that is nearly impossible to disprove. Legal scholars and human rights lawyers are engaged in a fierce debate about the concept of collective guilt, which seems to be the operating principle of the crackdown. Is it legitimate to target an entire group for the actions of its members, or does justice require that each individual be judged on their own specific deeds? The Salvadoran state has clearly chosen the former path, effectively declaring war on a social category rather than prosecuting individual crimes. This creates the legal black hole. You find yourself and you haven't been sentenced to a specific term. You are simply being detained pending investigation, a period that has no legal limit. As long as the state of exception remains in force, you could be here for years, for a decade, or for the rest of your life, without ever having your day in a real court. The legal system has not just been bent, it has been broken and remade into something new, a tool not for determining guilt or innocence, but for mass incapacitation, a system designed to remove a whole segment of the population from society indefinitely. Your family outside searches for a lawyer, but many are afraid to take on such cases, or they charge exorbitant fees for a process they know is likely futile. The legal abyss is deep and dark, and you are at the very bottom of it, trapped not by a sentence, but by a status, by the simple fact that you have been labeled an enemy of the state in a time of war. As you fade into the anonymity of your cell, a strange and unsettling phenomenon is occurring beyond El Salvador's borders. The world is not just watching your country's brutal experiment with a mixture of horror and fascination, it's also taking note. CECOT and the Bukele model are no longer just a national solution to a national problem. They are becoming a case study, a potential blueprint, a new and controversial model for justice that other nations grappling with their own security crises are beginning to look at with a dangerous kind of interest. You have become an unwilling pioneer, a test subject in a laboratory of authoritarian law and order, and the results are being closely monitored by governments who might be tempted to try the same experiment themselves. The appeal of the Bukele model is its simplicity and its perceived effectiveness in a world grappling with complex problems like organized crime, urban violence, and terrorism. The idea of a swift, decisive solution is incredibly seductive for politicians in countries like Honduras, Guatemala, or even parts of South America and Africa, where state authority is weak and criminal gangs run rampant. Bukele's approach looks like a tempting shortcut, a way to bypass the messy and often frustrating processes of democratic reform and judicial procedure. They see as sky-high approval ratings, they see the dramatic drop in the homicide rate, and they think maybe that could work here. It's like seeing a neighbor lose a lot of weight on a crazy crash diet. You know it's probably unhealthy in the long run, but the immediate results are so impressive you can't help but ask for their secret. A mainstream historical fact is that security policies often have a demonstration effect, where a successful, or perceived as successful, policy in one country is quickly adopted by its neighbors, a phenomenon seen with zero tolerance policing in the 1990s, and with counterterrorism legislation after September 11th. The Bukele effect is the latest iteration of this trend, a model for the social media age that combines hardline security with masterful populist branding. Delegations from other countries have reportedly visited El Salvador to study its security methods and its prison system. They are not coming to learn about rehabilitation or restorative justice. They are coming to learn about control, about incapacitation, about how to build their own. CECOT's human rights become a secondary concern, a luxury you can't afford when you're at war with terrorists, a term that is conveniently flexible and can be applied to anyone who opposes the state. A quirky tidbit of this international interest is how Bukele himself has actively promoted his model abroad. He uses his international platform not to build diplomatic bridges, but to proselytize his iron-fisted gospel. He taunts other leaders for being soft on crime and presents himself as the only one with the courage to do what is necessary, effectively marketing his brand of authoritarianism as a new export product alongside coffee and textiles. International relations theorists and political scientists are now debating whether this represents a new wave of authoritarian learning, where aspiring strongmen share tactics and strategies for consolidating power and suppressing dissent. In the digital age, the rise of social media allows these leaders to bypass traditional diplomatic channels and speak directly to a global audience, creating a kind of international populist alliance. This puts the international human rights community in a difficult position. Their traditional tools of naming and shaming are less effective against leaders who wear that shame as a badge of honor. The more the UN or Amnesty International condemns Bukele, the more he can play the victim of foreign meddling, and the more his model appeals to other leaders who resent the same international scrutiny. For them, Bukele's playbook is not just about fighting crime, it's about pushing back against a liberal international order that they see as weak and hypocritical. So, while you are trapped in a legal and physical void, you have become a pawn in a much larger geopolitical game. Your fate is part of a global conversation about the future of democracy and the rule of law. Will more countries follow El Salvador's path, trading freedom for security, embracing the seductive logic of the iron fist? The silence of your cell is a stark contrast to the loud and dangerous debate you have unwittingly inspired. The question is no longer just what will happen to you, but how many more like you will be created in how many more countries as the CECOT model begins to spread its shadow across the globe. The idea of the future is a luxury you can no longer afford. In the perpetual twilight of your cell, there is only the now, the endless unchanging present. But outside, in the world of clocks and calendars, the future of CECOT is a subject of intense and uneasy speculation, because a thing of this size, this permanence, cannot simply exist without casting a long shadow over tomorrow. The most immediate and unavoidable fact is the building itself. Concrete and steel have a lifespan far longer than political movements or human lives. A mainstream historical fact is that structures built with Roman concrete have survived for over 2,000 years, their chemical composition making them incredibly durable. CECOT, built with all the brute force of modern engineering, will likely stand for centuries, a silent monument on the Salvadoran landscape long after the names of the gangs and the presidents have faded into history books. It is the ultimate deferred maintenance problem, an architectural fact that will outlive the crisis that created it. But what becomes of it? What is the long-term plan for this concrete leviathan and its 40,000 inhabitants? The chilling answer seems to be that there isn't one. The current government's strategy appears to be Indefinite warehousing a solution that addresses the present without ever having to answer for the future. You will get old, and here your youth will curdle into a bitter middle age, and then a weary old age, all within these same gray walls. There's no geriatric wing in CECOT. There's no plan for end-of-life care. The system is designed for storage, not for the full arc of a human life. It is a human Superfund site, a place to contain a toxic problem, with no real plan for the cleanup. The most optimistic and wildly improbable future is one where a new government, a new political philosophy, leads to your release. Imagine that for a moment. The steel door slides open one day after 10, 20, 30 years, and you are told you can go. You step out, blinking into the unfiltered sunlight, a sensation so alien, it's painful. The world you knew is gone, replaced by something faster, louder, and infinitely more complex. How do you function in a world of technologies you've never seen, among people whose social cues are foreign language? You'd re-enter society with the social skills of a toaster or walking anachronism, a ghost from a past everyone else is trying to forget. A quirky and slightly surreal tidbit is the modern trend of adaptive reuse. For historical prisons around the world, old jails in places like Boston and London have been converted into luxury hotels, where guests pay a premium to sleep in a chicly renovated cell. The thought of CECOT one day becoming a wellness retreat or a data center is a piece of dark satire, but it highlights the central question: what do you do with a purpose-built monster when its purpose has passed? This leads to the most frightening long-term question for El Salvador. What if the monster created an even bigger monster? Future historians will still argue whether the Bukele model was a permanent cure for the country's gang problem or merely a temporary remission that created a more virulent form of the disease. What happens if a future government, under international pressure or due to a shift in public opinion, decides to release the surviving inmates en masse? You would be unleashing tens of thousands of men who are not rehabilitated, but are instead profoundly psychologically damaged, filled with a deep and abiding resentment for the state that erased their lives. Would they quietly reintegrate into society, or would they emerge as a new, more ruthless and more desperate criminal element, seeking revenge on the system that broke them? The future of CECOT is a Schrodinger's box of possibilities. As long as the doors stay closed, El Salvador is safe, and the experiment is a success. But the moment you consider opening them, you risk unleashing a cataclysm. The legacy of this place is therefore deeply uncertain. Will it be remembered as the bold stroke that saved a nation, a necessary evil that cauterized a bleeding wound, or will it be seen as a colossal mistake, a ticking time bomb of human misery that postponed a problem rather than solving it, planting the seeds of an even more violent future? You, of course, don't have the luxury of this debate. Your future is simple. It's the view of the concrete wall in front of you. It's the hum of the light above you. It is the slow, quiet process of being forgotten by a world that has decided it is better off without you. And so our journey ends here, in the heart of the great silence, a quiet so profound it has its own weight, its own texture, a silence composed of 40,000 muted heartbeats and 40,000 silenced histories. You have become a part of it, a single note in this vast monotonous chord of human stillness. The shock of arrival has long since faded. The fight has drained out of you, and the crushing monotony you once resisted has become the only rhythm you know. The perpetual twilight no longer feels strange. It's just the weather inside this place. The cold metal of the bunk is just your bed. The thin white shorts are just your clothes. The number is just your name. You have been successfully unmade, remolded into a component of the great machine. Remember the chaos of the world outside, the vibrant, bloody life of the streets. It all seems like a story you were told about someone else, a flickering movie from a forgotten dream. The silence is the ultimate expression of CECOT's power, is the sound of victory, the sound of a problem being solved by being buried alive. It is the final answer to the cacophony of gang violence, a quiet so total it smothers everything else. This practice of erasing a person from the public record has a long and grim history. The Romans called it damnatio memoriae, the damnation of memory. where a disgraced emperor or enemy of the state would have their statues torn down, their names chiseled off monuments, their very existence purged from official history. You are living a modern version of this ancient punishment, not erased by chisel and hammer, but by concrete and bureaucracy, a digital deletion from the server of society. The quiet here is not an absence of noise. There's always the hum, the coughing, the shuffling, the distant clang. But it's an absence of meaning, of purpose, of hope. It's the sound of 40,000 futures being canceled simultaneously. It's the ultimate quiet, quitting, a resignation from life itself. A quirky and deeply ironic tidbit is that the composer John Cage created a famous piece called 4 feet 33 inches, where a musician sits in silence for 4 minutes and 33 seconds, forcing the audience to listen to the ambient sounds of the environment, the unintentional music of the world. You are living in a permanent performance of this piece, but the ambient sounds are the symphony of despair, and the performance never ends. It's just a continuous loop, with no applause and no curtain call. Philosophers and ethicists continue to grapple with whether a state can morally justify the complete erasure of a person's social existence in the name of collective security, or if it constitutes a kind of living death that is more cruel than any swift execution. The question is debated in comfortable university halls and international forums, but here in this cell the debate is over, and the verdict has been rendered by the architecture itself. A silence is also a shield for the world outside. It allows society to enjoy its newfound peace without having to confront the human cost. It is the sound of a national cognitive dissonance, a collective agreement not to think too hard about the 40,000 ghosts who were sacrificed for their tranquility. Your silence makes their laughter possible. Your darkness makes their world bright. You have become the monster under the bed, the cautionary tale that keeps a nation in line, the silent testament to the absolute power of the state. Your story has ended. You are no longer a character in motion. You are a part of the scenery, a feature of this place, as permanent and as silent as the concrete walls that surround you. The great irony is that for the first time in your life, you are not a threat to anyone. You are not a problem to be solved. You are simply a body taking up a small amount of space in a very large box in the middle of El Salvador, waiting for nothing in the heart of the great silence. And so we leave that place. Now we pull back from the concrete walls and the perpetual gray light, letting the image of those cells fade from your mind. The journey is over and you are safe here in the comfort of your own space. The heavy silence of CECOT gives way to the gentle sounds of your own room, perhaps the soft hum of the fan you turned on earlier, or the distant whisper of a passing car. Feel the weight of your own blanket, the softness of your pillow, and the reassuring darkness around you. That world of steel and despair is far away, a story that has been told and now put away. Let the rhythm of your own breathing be your guide back to a place of rest and calm. There are no unblinking lights here, no cold metal bunks, just the quiet promise of sleep. The tension can leave your shoulders. Now your mind can let go of the journey and begin to drift. Your only task is to relax, to let the story fade like a dream upon waking, and to allow yourself to sink into a deep and peaceful rest. There is nothing more to see, nothing more to hear, just the gentle descent into your own sweet dreams.